Bombshell tonight. Video of Nancy Guthrie and her kidnapper.
A man with a phone he says he'll never show you, a video he claims exists but won't release, and a price tag of exactly 1 Bitcoin standing between the public and what might be the most important piece of evidence in the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie. That's where we pick up tonight, because in the last few days, the inbox of TMZ founder Harvey Levin received another message, and this one is different from anything that's come before it.
Another email from the man who says he knows who Nancy Guthrie's kidnappers are and can lead the FBI to those kidnappers for 1 Bitcoin. So the man writes that he has clearly been following things we've been saying, questioning the FBI telling us that the person who wrote this might be a female. The person does not say he's a male for sure, but he puts a big question mark there, and then also puts a question mark where we say we might be doing a documentary. In this email, which by the way we have sent to the FBI, he says that he has video. He has video of Nancy Guthrie with the main kidnapper on what probably would be the last day of her life. That's the way he puts it here. He says, while what it contains is my definition of delivering it on a silver platter, a short video of the main guy with Nancy the day that was probably...
The writer claims to have video footage of Nancy Guthrie with the man he calls the main kidnapper, filmed, in his words, on what was probably the last day of her life. He says the footage sits on a phone that is powered off, hidden in a location he describes as secure but findable if you know where to look. And he wants payment before he'll say another word about where that location is. 1 Bitcoin. At today's value, that's somewhere around $58,000. Stay with me, because this is where it gets complicated.
We know that Harvey got another letter at TMZ. Another. A pattern, though, doesn't always equal promise, and I think that's what we have to take a look at here. Sometimes predators are out there looking for a payday. Now, that may be the case, it may not be the case. There's a pattern here, and Harvey is definitely taking it seriously, and as he should, I think.
Here's the detail that's pulling investigators and amateur sleuths alike back into this case with renewed urgency. This isn't the first message, it's at least the third. And according to people close to the investigation, the new email references a Bitcoin wallet address from an earlier message, one that was never made public, one that only the original sender and the recipients would have known. The writer says that old address no longer works and provides a new one in its place. If that detail is accurate, it suggests continuity. It suggests possibly that whoever sent the first messages is the same person sending this one. Ask yourself why that detail matters. Because in cases like this, consistency is currency. It's one of the only tools investigators have for separating a credible source from someone exploiting a grieving family's worst nightmare. To understand why this update has reopened old wounds, you have to go back, just briefly, to where this thread of communication began. Nancy Guthrie, 84 years old, vanished from her home in a quiet, rural stretch of Arizona earlier this year. Investigators have publicly confirmed at least 2 ransom-style messages were sent to the family in the early days following her disappearance, and what makes those 2 messages stand apart from the noise that followed is that Nancy's own daughter, broadcast journalist Savannah Guthrie, said publicly that she believed them to be real. On live television, asked directly about the notes, she said, quote, "The 2 notes that we received that we responded to, I tend to believe those are real." Take a moment with that. This is not an anonymous tipster speaking in vague generalities. This is the victim's daughter, a trained attorney, someone whose entire professional life has been built on parsing language and credibility, going on camera and staking her belief on the authenticity of communications tied to her mother's abduction. That statement alone is why this new message matters so much. If the earlier notes were real, and if this third message uses the same financial trail as those earlier notes, then the question stops being whether someone is lying for attention and starts being whether law enforcement is sitting on a genuine lead they can't yet act on. But here's where the discomfort creeps in, because nothing about this situation is simple, and the more you look at it, the more it resists a clean narrative. The two notes Savannah says she believes are connected to a chilling detail. The family says they understand their mother has died and that they are pleading for permission to bring her remains home so they can grieve properly. A message that essentially confirms a death without delivering a body. A message that asks for money not to save a life, but to recover one that is already gone. This changes everything we thought we knew about what kind of case this actually is. And yet the latest message, the one with the secret phone and the silver platter promise, breaks from that emotional register entirely. It isn't addressed to the family. It isn't pleading or apologetic. It's transactional, almost businesslike, demanding payment for access, written to a media outlet instead of to investigators or the people who loved Nancy Guthrie. That shift in tone is one of the things drawing skepticism from people who've spent careers studying cases like this. If this is truly someone connected to the people responsible, why route the message through a journalist instead of directly to the FBI, where, depending on how the investigation unfolds, cooperation could carry real legal weight? This is where things get serious. Investigators and outside experts who've reviewed the publicly available portions of these messages have raised a problem that's hard to ignore. The writer claims sophistication. He claims to know the kidnappers personally. He claims fear for his own life if his identity is discovered. But he also says he won't send a single photograph as proof, citing concern that metadata embedded in the image could be traced back to him. To anyone with even basic familiarity with digital security, that explanation has a hole in it large enough to drive a truck through. Stripping metadata from a photo before sending it is something close to trivial. It takes seconds. If someone is sophisticated enough to operate anonymous email accounts, set up untraceable cryptocurrency wallets, and evade an active FBI investigation for months, the idea that they don't know how to send a single image without identifying information attached doesn't add up. And when something doesn't add up in a case like this, you don't ignore it. You sit with it. You ask what it might mean. We're going to keep pulling on this thread because there's more here, much more, including what investigators say about the porch intruder caught on camera the night Nancy disappeared, the unusual detail that may or may not tie him to this very same writer, and why one law enforcement figure in this case has said things publicly that even his own colleagues seem unable to explain. But first, I want to know what you think. Does the reused Bitcoin address change how credible this message feels to you? Drop your theory below, because the people watching this case closely, people just like you, have been right before. Before we go further, if you believe a story like this deserves more attention, more eyes, more people paying attention to the details that don't add up, take a moment and share this video. Cases like Nancy Guthrie's move forward, in part because the public refuses to look away. Now let's get back into it because the contradictions don't stop with a single missing screenshot. Let's talk about the porch. Investigators have released video, now widely circulated, showing a figure approaching Nancy Guthrie's home in the hours connected to her disappearance. The figure is calm, deliberate. He removes the camera covering the porch, not in a frantic motion, not like someone panicking under pressure, but in a way that several experts who reviewed the footage have described as practiced. Think about that for a moment. A burglar caught off guard tends to move erratically, eyes darting, body tense, every second feeling like exposure. What investigators describe instead is someone who appears to know exactly what he's doing and exactly how long he has to do it. That single detail has shifted the working theory for some people close to this case. Early on, there was a theory floating around that this could have been a burglary that spiraled into something far worse, a home invasion gone wrong, an opportunist who stumbled into violence he didn't plan for. But the behavior on that porch tells a different story to those who study body language and tradecraft for a living. It suggests planning. It suggests the person had been there before, possibly during daylight hours, possibly during the months leading up to the abduction, learning the layout, learning the blind spots, learning exactly where that camera needed to come down and why. If that theory holds, then this was never a burglary. It was a targeted abduction, and that single word, targeted, changes the entire emotional weight of this case, because it means someone chose Nancy Guthrie specifically, deliberately, and for reasons that remain unknown to the public. Here's another detail that's been quietly nagging at people following this case closely. The crime scene inside the home was processed, released back to the family, and then, according to reporting, closed off again days later. In any investigation, that kind of back and forth raises questions, not necessarily about wrongdoing, but about how confident investigators were in what they collected the first time around. Evidence handled this way invites what's known in legal circles as chain of custody concerns, the kind of detail a defense attorney would seize on the moment this case reaches a courtroom, if it ever does. It doesn't mean evidence was mishandled. It means the timeline itself becomes part of the story, another thread the public is left trying to follow without all the information investigators actually have. And then there's the sheriff. Multiple times throughout this investigation, the local sheriff overseeing the case has made public statements that seem to shift, soften, or contradict earlier comments. At one point, describing a significant amount of blood found inside the home, a detail that was never fully explained or revisited publicly. At another point, addressing the latest extortion messages directly on a morning talk show, seeming to dismiss their relevance just as the FBI's own posture suggested otherwise. This is where things get genuinely confusing for anyone trying to track the official version of events, because two arms of the same investigation appear, at least from the outside, to be sending different signals. We don't know why. Maybe it's simply the natural friction of local and federal agencies working a high-profile case under enormous public scrutiny. Maybe it's strategic, a deliberate effort to manage what information reaches the public and when. What we do know is that inconsistency breeds speculation, and in a case already drowning in unverified claims, every inconsistency from official channels makes it harder for the public, and maybe even for the family, to know what to actually believe. This changes everything we thought we knew about how transparent this investigation has actually been. Because if the people meant to be the most reliable voices in this case, the law enforcement officials briefing the public, are sending mixed signals, then it's no wonder a vacuum has opened up, and no wonder that vacuum is being filled by anonymous emailers demanding Bitcoin for evidence nobody can verify. Let's go back to the writer for a moment, because there's a detail in the most recent message that deserves real attention. The author appears irritated, almost defensive, at the suggestion floating around that he might actually be a woman. He pushes back on that idea with a question mark, not a denial, a question mark, as though unsure himself how to respond to the speculation. Cybersecurity and behavioral experts who've looked at the writing patterns across all three messages have raised the possibility that linguistic cues, word choice, sentence rhythm, even the emotional register used when addressing the family lean toward patterns more commonly associated with female writers. That doesn't confirm anything. It's not proof. But it's the kind of detail that reshapes how investigators might be approaching their search, widening the pool of who they're looking for rather than narrowing it. And there's something else buried in that same message worth sitting with. The writer insists he is not, in his words, the idiot who called in a false tip about a burial site in Mexico, a claim that suggests this person has been watching this case unfold publicly, closely, possibly for months, separating himself from other opportunists trying to profit off Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. If true, it tells us this is someone embedded in the public narrative of this case, reading the same reporting we are, reacting to the same theories, possibly even shaping his messages around what he sees other people getting wrong. That's a chilling thought. Whoever is writing these emails may be watching this very story unfold in real time, the same way you are right now. So, where does that leave us? A targeted abduction theory gaining traction, a sheriff whose statements don't always align, a crime scene with a complicated timeline, and an anonymous source who may be the key to everything, or may be exploiting a tragedy for $58,000 and nothing more. In Part 3, we're going deeper into what the FBI's own behavior might be telling us, and why one expert believes investigators may already be closer to an arrest than the public has been told. Part 3 of 3 Guthrie, final installment, roughly 1,000 words, with the closing as requested. There's a reason some investigators believe an arrest may be closer than the public realizes, and it has nothing to do with the Bitcoin demands or the anonymous messages at all. It has to do with what was left behind on that porch the night Nancy Guthrie disappeared. According to people who've reviewed the footage and the limited forensic details that have become public, the intruder was wearing gloves. Careful, deliberate, the kind of precaution someone takes when they know exactly what they're doing. But there's one detail that even careful planning may not account for. At several points in the footage, he appears to be holding something small in his mouth, what's been described as a bite light, a compact flashlight some people use hands-free during nighttime work, whether that's law enforcement executing a search, a contractor working in tight spaces, or, in this case, someone who needed both hands free in the dark. Anyone who's used one knows the side effect. They cause you to drool, sometimes heavily, almost involuntarily. If that happened here, even briefly, even just once, it raises the possibility of biological evidence left behind on the very doorframe he was photographed touching. DNA doesn't care how careful you are with gloves. This changes everything we thought we knew about how close investigators might actually be, because if that transfer happened, it doesn't just identify a person. It can be run through forensic genetic genealogy, the same technique that's cracked decades-old cold cases by tracing distant family relatives instead of direct matches. It's slow, it's methodical, and it doesn't make headlines until the day it suddenly does. But before we let that theory carry too much hope, we have to sit with the same caution every credible investigator brings to this kind of evidence. The home was processed, reopened, and processed again. Time passed between those two windows. People moved through that space who weren't part of the original collection. Any DNA evidence recovered now will face intense scrutiny over how it was preserved, what could have contaminated it, and whether it can survive the kind of legal challenge a case this high profile will inevitably draw. Real investigations rarely move in straight lines, and this one is no exception. Here's the part of this story that's hardest to sit with, the part that doesn't resolve no matter how many times you go back over the timeline. If the earlier ransom notes were genuine, and if Savannah Guthrie's belief in them was based on details only investigators and the family would have known, then somewhere out there are people who know precisely what happened to Nancy Guthrie, who have known for months and who have used that knowledge not to help bring her home, but to extract money from a family already shattered by grief. That is the cruelty hiding underneath every detail of this case. Whether it's a stranger exploiting public attention for $58,000 in Bitcoin, or someone genuinely connected to her abduction testing how far they can push before getting caught, the result for the Guthrie family is the same. More waiting, more uncertainty, more nights without an answer. Ask yourself what kind of person watches a family beg publicly for their mother's remains and responds not with information, but with a price tag. Whether or not this latest message turns out to be real, that question alone tells you something about how this case has metastasized beyond a missing person investigation into something closer to a public spectacle, one where grief has become a target for opportunists circling at the edges of a tragedy that isn't theirs. And yet, in the middle of all that noise, there's still a family waiting. Savannah Guthrie, by every account from people who know her, has continued showing up to her job, continued speaking carefully and deliberately about a case that involves her own mother, navigating a kind of public grief most people will never have to understand. Whatever frustration exists about mixed messages from officials, whatever skepticism surrounds the latest extortion attempt, none of it changes the basic, unbearable fact at the center of this story. A mother is missing, a family is waiting, and somewhere, someone knows more than they've said. If this case has stayed with you the way it's stayed with so many people following it closely, you understand why investigators won't rush an arrest just to satisfy public pressure, and why every new development, no matter how small, no matter how unverified, deserves real scrutiny before it's accepted as truth. That's the responsibility carried by everyone covering this story honestly, including the people sitting across from cameras every night trying to make sense of fragments the public is allowed to see. We don't know yet whether the man behind these messages is telling the truth. We don't know whether that phone exists, whether that video is real, or whether this is simply the latest version of a cruelty that's followed this family since the night Nancy disappeared. What we do know is that the questions keep multiplying faster than the answers, and that somewhere in Arizona, investigators are still working a case that refuses to fit neatly into any single theory. This story is not over. Nancy Guthrie has not been found. No arrest connected to her disappearance has been made public. And until that changes, every detail, every inconsistency, every strange decision made by the people inside this investigation deserves to be examined, not because we want to assign blame before the facts are known, but because Nancy Guthrie and the family still waiting for her deserve nothing less than the truth. If you followed this case closely, share your theory in the comments below. Share this video if you believe Nancy Guthrie's story deserves to stay in the public eye. And subscribe, because when this case moves, when new information surfaces, you'll be here for it. This story isn't finished. Stay with us until it is.